Now, I'll start by talking about land. I think land is something that's very deeply personal for many people, and many people, oftentimes people think of it in practical terms. Land is really where we build our homes or where we are farming or which we pass on to our children. But in reality, we also know that land is very political, personal, and sometimes complicated. Through the work that I've been doing for many years, we know that billions of people around the world live without secure rights to the land on which they occupy. And that means that at any moment, they could be told to leave often without compensation. Now, for these families, this creates a constant fear and insecurity. So why would they invest in improving that home or that land if tomorrow someone can come and tear it down or take it away? Or why would a bank give you credit if you have no formal proof that you belong to that piece of land? So without these secure land rights, people are often locked out of opportunities and basic services that many of us take for granted. So for example, here in the US, we take for granted we have water, sanitation, and electricity, but sometimes that is not so, it's not so easy for people back home, because if you cannot provide evidence that they are the owners of that land, then they will not be able to be connected with water, sanitation, electricity, and so on. Now, when I worked previously, I think many of you may have seen my bio already. I worked previously within the Global Land Tool Network that is hosted by UN Habitat. Just a little bit, for those who don't know about the Global Land Tool Network, or GLTN in short, it's a coalition of more than 80 partners hosted by UN Habitat. It brings together governments, development partners, civil society, professionals, research institutions, and others to address land governance issues globally. Now, when I worked at UN Habitat, I saw really how multi-layered these challenges of land are. Usually it's not only just about ownership, it's about history, it's about culture, it's about power, and sometimes even survival. And in many countries, land laws exist, yes, but they do not work for everyone. And this is where sometimes this issue around gender comes in, because I also wanted to touch a little bit about gender in my discussion today. In many communities, we find that women are systematically excluded from land ownership. They may not be able to inherit land from their parents, or their names aren't included on titles, even when they contribute equally in either acquiring that land or even cultivating that land. And in many cases, widows may even lose their homes when their husbands die, leaving them and their children extremely vulnerable. So why does this really matter? Why do we talk about issues around gender and land rights? It's because when women lack the secure rights to land, the entire family suffers. We've done a lot of research around this, and it shows that when women own land or inherit property, they are more likely to invest in their children's health or education, and the households become more resilient in the face of shocks or even unemployment and other disasters. So when we talk about gender equality in land, it's not just about a women's issue. No, it's a development issue, it's an economic issue. At the same time, it's also a justice issue. And then we have informal settlements back home in Kenya, or in some places people call them slums, like in Kibera, Mukuru, and so many other places. And we find that in many of these informal settlements, these residents face multiple layers of exclusion. In the work that we have done for many years, we find that when the mapping was being done, say, for example, Nairobi, and they would map the informal settlements, they would map it like it is empty, that nobody lives there, because they map it that way because many people who live there, they are considered squatters because they live on land that does not belong to them. But for many times we found that they have lived in those same communities for decades. Some have buried their great-grandfathers or mothers in the same land. They have raised children there, they've contributed to the local economy, but legally they do not exist. So this leads to a lot of inequality and poverty cycles that continue to impact these communities. So this is where the GLTN, the Global Land Tool Network, came in, so that instead of imposing one solution, because we realized that in a place like Kibera, for example, you could not have the same solution to address land issues as, say, you'd have a solution like, say, in Kare, because it's totally different. The context is very different. So GLTN developed some practical tools that countries and communities can adapt to their own context. and they help to map the land in a very affordable and participatory way. And I think something that we really stressed on is the need for participation, participatory. How are we ensuring that everybody's voice or everybody's rights is mapped when we are mapping this land, so that we are recording all the rights that can normally would not fit in a traditional title deed, but ensure that everybody finds themselves represented in that document. So the whole idea was to broaden the definition of land rights so that it's more than just the ownership rights. And we know that these tools do not magically fix the land, but at least they provided the governments, communities a practical way to work with what we have, so that if we know that, on this land, somebody is farming it, or somebody passes over it, or somebody is renting, or somebody owns the land, or somebody else owns the property, we are able to map all this, and then from there we can start having a conversation in terms of when something is being done to that land, who are we dealing with that, whose rights are we going to protect? With that issue around land, the work on land is then what led me to Habitat for Humanity International. I don't know how many of you know about Habitat, but it is a global housing organization working in more than 70 countries around the world, including in Kenya. And what makes Habitat's work very unique is that we don't just build houses, we build houses for the low income, but we also, apart from the work that we do directly with families on the ground, we also focus on the bigger picture. It's around how do we change policies, how do we change that enabling environment so that people can help themselves, because we know that Habitat cannot do everything at the same time. So we are working to change policies, strengthening systems, or working to make housing products and services and financing more accessible to the low income. And linking this to land rights, for example, we find that many times a bank will not give you a loan if you do not have formal land title. But we know that many of the families we serve, in many cases, they do not have title. So how do we tailor products that say somebody who lives in Kibera can be able to access, say, housing microfinance so that they can improve their homes? So a lot of that is the work that we do. We work very closely with microfinance institutions to address that. But at the same time, also we work to influence policies so that more people can access land on which that they can live in. Now, in my current role at Habitat, I work to shape how Habitat uses its voice globally. As I said, we are focusing on housing. So how do we work to make sure that housing is recognized as very central to development? How do we make sure that more financing, more resources are going to housing so that more people have access to housing? And we do this by engaging, we engage the G7, we engage the UN agencies, we engage various international institutions and so on to push for housing issues to be part of a global agenda. Because if it is part of the agenda, if it is included as one of the priorities in the strategy, then we know that there will be more resources going, there'll be more money going into housing, and hopefully more people will be housed. Because at the end of the day, we know that the house that we live in is not just a matter of the four walls. It's a place for safety, where children grow, where families gather, and where people access jobs, schools, health. It's very foundational for all the things that we do. And just knowing how massive the problem is, from the recent research that has come out from UN Habitat, it shows that 2.8 billion people around the world have inadequate housing. And out of this, about 1.1 billion people live in slums or informal settlements. And we know that slums or informal settlements are the most visible manifestation of inadequate housing. And when we look at all these statistics, we know that it's not just the numbers, but there are people behind these numbers who are raising families, running businesses, and trying to live out of very difficult circumstances. Now, a little bit about Kenya, the work that we do in Kenya. So Habitat for Humanity has been in Kenya since 1982. Since then, we have supported about 345,000 families in about 12 countries to access safe, decent, and affordable housing. And we focus on some of the most vulnerable groups: orphans, widows, elderly, and people with disabilities. And through our work in Kenya, we combine the direct construction. So we actually build houses for the low income. We also provide sanitation, but also we do a lot of advocacy around housing. At the same time, we have a whole lot of work around housing microfinance, settlement upgrading, and also addressing issues around land. and I can be able to tell you about those later, when at the end when if we're having some questions. But again, we know that housing, despite all that we're doing in Kenya, we know that the need in Kenya is still very big. Kenya currently needs about 200,000 new housing units each year. Yet, even with that, we still have a deficit currently of about 2 million units. So how do we bridge this gap? We know that the government is doing work on their own, but again, Habitat is also doing. But again, this is not enough. I think it requires partnerships. It requires all of us to work together so that we can address the housing gap. And I think for me, I always say, even if we do it one at a time, at least it's helping to fill a gap somewhere. As we talk about that, I also wanted to share with you all different ways that you can be involved in Habitat's work, not just in the US, but also back home in Kenya. I don't know, many of you may have heard about Habitat for Humanity's Global Village Program. It's a volunteer program that lets people come together, often working for about a week or two to build homes and support community projects. And since 1989, we've been traveling all over the world, including in Kenya. And in Kenya, we are hosting global village programs in Laikipia County, and where we have volunteers, coming together to build houses for those in need. And we feel that diaspora volunteers, potentially like you all sitting here, have a really unique role to play in this global village program, because you understand both worlds. You understand the needs back home in Kenya, but again, also the opportunities that are here in the US. So if you join these global village teams, you can work side by side with those families to contribute your time, your skills, and also support programs, even financially, if possible. So, for example, last year we hosted about 3,600 hours of volunteer hours in Kenya, where we were directly able to improve about 10 homes in Laikipia. And that might sound small, but for those families, it's life-changing. And when you add those efforts together, the impact really grows. So my invitation to you all is, if you're able to join us, to build with us, to advocate with us, to partner with us, whether through volunteering, supporting programs, or using your network to amplify Habitat for Humanity's mission, so that we are part of this solution of ensuring everybody has a decent place to live. I have more information about the Global Village Program. If anyone of you is interested, I'll have a flyer that I can share with the organizers that they can share. But briefly, that's what I wanted to share. I'm happy to take any questions. I think there's so much. I think I was only given about 15 minutes, but there's so much that I could share about the work that I've done. But I'm open to questions, and I'll throw it back to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Becky, maybe just to give you context, and I apologize, I didn't do this. So there are 3 speakers in this session. One of them was Teresa Wasonga. The other one was Grace Cargo. I know her, Grace Cargo, and you're the third one. So I think we are in the place where the audience will ask the 3 of you questions.
Okay, sure. All right.
And people applauded. I don't know if you had the clap.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the 3 presentations, if you have questions for clarity or other things, please feel free to ask.
Yeah, I have a question for you. Thanks for all of you for the nice information you shared. And thanks, Esther, for organizing for the bigger share with us. Your title was on about the grievance. That's really very exciting. I think it was published that month, and we have come from the same high schools. We know things may not be very good, and there's so many issues with education because of politics and other things. But maybe the word grievance was too strong. That's a comment.
Yes, and it's subjective. And again, sometimes we need to push things in order for them to make sense. Dreams, it was for dreams. It's a graveyard of dreams. And because of time, I did actually start with the preamble. The fact that when kids go to high school, they have a lot of dreams. If you ask any kid in Kenya going to high school, what do you want to be? It's doctor, lawyer, all of these things. But when they're finishing high school, their kids will even say, I don't even want to think about it. I don't want to. And when you imagine that 500,000 children are getting D and below, yet they have no dreams. are buried in the high school. So I know when I thought about it, but I was like, how do we get people's attention? I do not intend actually to publish it as it were, but it amazed me when I started looking into those statistics and just saw the number of dreams that we have added. Because this is the thing. It's suppose you got a D in high school, wanted to be an engineer, he couldn't be, but he knew he was smart. He figured out how to generate electricity out of a fall. And he's generating electricity somewhere in Muranga or near for his village. But this kid's dream of being an engineer was already buried in the high school because of that dream. So, yeah, for what it's worth. Right. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I remember in 2006, 2007, I wrote an opinion piece in the Daily Nation. Why are we producing dreams? And attracted a lot of attention, and I still have the folder for the responses that people gave. Even PESA, I was a member of PESA then, but I quit. PESA responded. People from PESA responded about that article. So if you'd like to have the responses to add to your issues, I can share it with you. Then the history of education and why we are producing many kids is a long story which begins right from almost independence, depending on why people are going to school. And the songs even people sang about education, how they were changed to reflect that education is no longer important. Then the issue of teachers. You find someone like Betty, this guy who owns Karen Hospital, sits on Minoro TV and she says, Betty Nikondo, the only thing that could have been is a teacher. What is the morale for that teacher? Then this guy who advertises OLX, he has all professions in the advert saying, I'll have a dinner table, I'll entertain more. Then when he comes to the school lady teacher, the lady is selling her table because she's expectant and cannot afford her medical bill. So all these things demoralizing teachers. How can we arrest that? Because the teacher is key in a high school. And I have looked at all those things in my work, and I have presentations of how teachers have been demoralized to the extent that they really don't care. I chaired the boards in Kenya, and I could tell that their morale was very down. And that's why, one of the reasons why they did, the others come with.
Let's just make the comments.
I was just going to say a comment related to what Jonathan said. I take the other side. I'm like, I want you to publish with that. You need to get attention to that because you don't realize the impact. Then from the beginning, historically, they'll say, hey, we only have maybe 4 A, whatever number of A's, based on the slots the university could take, forgetting that people are creative and they can take their students elsewhere. So we have students applying to come to graduate school, and the university has taken almost the same strategy. There are very few first class, very few students make A's in their classes. When they apply to graduate school here, we are evaluating and they have C's and we can't admit that. So the GPAs, when you translate, are very low. So the approach Kenya has taken from the very beginning is really wrong, and it has to be corrected. And sometimes you need to use that language to get attention and have conversations about this.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you to all the speakers. I had a question for both Dr. Kago. She presented, her background is microbiology. So I have a joint